And this is the part of the show we call You Be the Judge, when we look at legal issues on both sides of the pond, in other words, in the UK, with lawyer and broadcaster Joseph Kotrie-Monson, and the US with Mark Schnapp, a US lawyer, both at the top of their game, both really highly respected. So the subjects we're going to be looking at today is, in a moment, immigration, what politicians tell you and what are the legal facts. And then a little later, we'll be looking at both abortion and payouts to prisoners in the light of that 5-point-something million payout to the prisoner who was stabbed in a British prison. But let's start off with immigration, because that's something that cropped up yet again at the Reform Conference in Birmingham. Reform UK's MPs have, repeating what they've said before over and over and again. They say that migrants who are intercepted while crossing the English Channel can just be taken back to France. It's part of the party's four-point plan to stop the boats. Richard Tice has said it. They pointed to countries like Belgium. Richard Tice earlier said Starmer needs to explain why he doesn't have leadership and courage to use the 1982 UN Convention of Law at Sea to pick up and take back. When you mention law, don't go on what anyone says unless you're talking to a top-flight lawyer like Joseph Kotrie-Monson. So, Joseph, it's as simple as that. That's what Britain should be doing. I'll get 1,000 million messages on my screen. Just take them back to France. Just take them back to France. Apparently, what is the law saying now?
Apparently so, or at least if you listen to that great and noble attorney, Richard Tice, Trisha of Reform. I'm glad that I'm not his client. I suspect he hasn't been to a law school. I tell you what he's coming out with at a basic level, even to this non-maritime, non-international law of the sea. You'll remember, Trisha, I'm a criminal lawyer. Even to me, easily recognizable as claptrap. Even the BBC have done a fact check article on it, in which they've quoted not only a notable maritime law expert in practice, but also a legal academic, a professor in the field. So yeah, what Richard Tice is saying is that there is a legal right for a country to unilaterally return a migrant to their point of origin. In this case, France, while they're still on their boats or having been rescued, when patently, actually, it does not. And what is being misquoted in this rather wonderful, you can check it out on Twitter for a chuckle, 4-point plan for stopping the boats that Richard Tice and his colleagues at Reform, UKIP, Brexit Party, I lose track, have been posting recently. The relevant part, UN Convention of Law at Sea. Of the Law at Sea 1982. He says it's an undiscovered loophole, which says that you can just put these people back where they came from. But actually, it's only in circumstances where both countries agree. So for usually some kind of logistical reasons, or from the point of view of saving people's lives when these boats are rescued, because this is the concept that this law covers, that of rescue at sea. That when both parties agree, so for example, England and France, then in those circumstances, those people can be taken back to France. Not unilaterally, not we will refuse, but we will cooperate. And that is the basic law. So this is being actually quite cynically misrepresented, Trisha.
And Joseph, am I not right in saying there's a law that says any, foreign country, in this case, let's talk about, it's the UK when it comes to France, they can't rock up and drop people off into another country? That is against the law, because when you think about it, countries could drop off mercenaries or anybody to do that. So there's a law that says if you're a foreign ship, you can't do that. And also, the other place that's been quoted is Belgium. Belgium did it. Oh, no, they didn't. And even all the top legal eagles in Belgium said, what the hell are you talking about? No, we haven't. Migrants don't try to cross the channel from Belgium anyway. And no, this is against all our laws. Every country that he's mentioned, when you actually talk to the top legal people, they're like, What's he on about? Never happened.
Do you know what, Trisha? Belgian law enforcement were asked by some of the more responsible of the news outlets that have published this drivel, at least critically, over the past couple of days, whether on any occasion in relation to France or any other country they had employed this tactic, and the answer was a categoric no. And we've talked about the idea that it's unlawful, it's illegal to just dump people on other people's territory. It's also breathtakingly stupid. 25% of our food supply comes through Calais, either to Folkestone or to Dover on that narrow strait by underground train or by sea. Imagine that all of that relies on goodwill and professionalism that we expect from our neighbours, as they should be able to expect from us. When we start breaking our international obligations to simply dump people on another country's territory, what is going to happen to that goodwill? I tell you what, I had my eggs and bacon this morning, and I'd like to be able to have them tomorrow. So please, Richard Tice, just get your hands off the whole thing, would you?
Well, but Joseph, you're messing around with, it sounds so good and it takes so many people in. You're such a spoilsport. Let's go to Mark Schnapp in the US. We're talking about immigration, what politicians would have you believe versus the actual laws. And again, there's quite a difference from the rhetoric or what the law and the Constitution said, because I was surprised when I did a little bit of research, and you know far more than me, Mark. There's a belief amongst certain people that undocumented immigrants have no constitutional rights. Well, they do, but whether they actually play out in court and how they might be twisted is another issue, isn't it?
Well, I tried a case for about 4 months about employment of undocumented aliens. And it was actually a very controversial case at the time. They were all Muslim people, and it was in Central Florida. So I have to tell you, the prejudice against these people was horrible. That being said, that was a criminal case, but you're asking about politics, and politically, our governor in particular has been he's been doing some bizarre things with respect to immigration. For example, he has used Florida resources to bus or fly immigrants who cross the border in Texas to cities in Massachusetts, for example, in resort areas. And his justification is, well, they might come into Florida, which is complete crap. But that being said, it's a very controversial issue. And so then it's becoming a very big issue in this year's election. For example, in Cuba, there's always been this kind of wet foot, dry foot policy, which is similar to what Joseph talks about. Like if you land here, the U.S. will take them. If not, if they're intercepted at sea, they'll bring them back to whatever country, in particular Cuba, where they were leaving from. There is an issue now with returning immigrants to Mexico, in particular, where they're crossing the border at the Rio Grande. And those are very, and there's been a big issue that Kamala Harris, who's was supposed to take care of immigration when she was, that was one of her functions, that she failed at doing that. And so that's going to become a big issue in this year's election. But I will tell you that there's obviously there's two different issues. Number one is legal immigration, and there is there's certainly an increased ability to allow immigration from countries like Nicaragua, Honduras, issues, countries where there's a lot of political unrest and violence, Cuba as well. But I was always wondering when I tried that case about the illegal immigrants who were, they were called actually undocumented immigrants who were, and it was an employment law case. If the same case would have been tried or prosecuted criminally if they were Cubans who were being either as an employer or the immigrants themselves. Oddly enough, one of the immigrants who was undocumented wound up, in that particular case, wound up getting a job at the Kennedy Space Center. So, you know.
Wow. Well, there you go. One of the things I thought was interesting is under the Constitution, you can't separate families. And one of the things where that helped was when under Trump, where just as Trump came in, children were being separated from their parents. And that went against the Constitution. So that under law was no longer allowed to happen. But it's very hard, even when things are set in the Constitution, because it's when any person puts foot upon the land that they come under the Constitution. In actual courts of law, where you're the right to representation in court, getting a lawyer, all of those sorts of things are still barriers, aren't they?
Oh yeah, I mean, actually, Trisha, many of the children who were separated during the Trump administration still have not been reunited with their families, which is awful. That being said, yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to get lawyers to represent undocumented aliens, or there is a group here in Florida that one of my law partners, who's since passed away, was very involved in. I think it was called Immigrants Justice or something like that. I forgot.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's difficult, and the laws are very much against the aliens. A friend of mine is now an immigration judge, and she faces these challenges every day. But you're right. I mean, the laws are not in favor of undocumented aliens. The theory being is that they shouldn't have been here in the first place. I think there is what you just said is there's a certain unfairness, whether it be constitutional or just moral, as to separating children from their families. But it's done, and it's still a big problem to this day. It's a leftover from the Trump administration. And just getting back to your initial point about politics, I mean, there was a point where Trump actually said, he wanted a Muslim ban on anyone entering the country.
Sorry to cut you off, because we're about to run out of time. I want to pick this up after the break.